morning. Greet all of you in Christ's name this morning. It's really good to be here again this morning. It's good to have a day of rest, a day to look at God's Word and hopefully be encouraged. This morning, I don't know how your last week was. Mine had a lot going on, and it's one of those weeks where I would wake up in the morning and it was just seemed like it was nonstop. I had things going on in the evenings, and spring is always busy. It seems like because all of us are actively trying to fight back the wilderness that's at our properties. We're trying to kill weeds, and we're trying to get the grass mowed. And it seems if you don't mow it every 2 days, it looks pretty rough. And then you're supposed to plant garden, and of course, with my job, spring is a super busy time of year, and there's times where I really don't enjoy spring that much because I'm just flat wore out half the time. But I think that's typical. Spring is always a busy time for us. A lot of good things to do. A lot of we see the benefit after we mow the yard and we spray the weeds and we plant the garden, and things look nice, and we have a harvest out of the garden. But I think life can be a struggle sometimes, can't it? Life can be hard. It can be challenging. Like we mentioned, there's a lot of sickness right now, and so if you spend all week with sick children, this morning it can get pretty depressing pretty quick, because it's just you're trying to take care of your kids, and you're trying to make sure that everything else is still happening, and you're tired, and you probably didn't sleep much, and life can look kind of dark. Sometimes we're facing more long-term things. Things in our lives that we wish were different, and we just flat out can't fix it. Maybe health issues, maybe relationship issues, maybe just all kinds of things that we can face and that get really hard, and we try to figure out, how do I deal with this? What am I supposed to do? So this morning, I promise this is not going to be a depressing sermon. I hope to encourage all of us to keep going and to keep pressing on. It's a sermon about perseverance and about endurance and about the fact that we're in a marathon. This isn't a sprint. We're in a marathon, and the fact that it's important to keep on going, especially when it gets hard. In the 1992 Summer Olympics, there was two moments that were especially heart-rending. The first one was Gail Devers. She was an American sprinter. She was the clear leader in the 100-meter hurdles, and she tripped over the last barrier. And she fell to her knees, and she crawled and drug herself just the final meters to cross the finish line. And she finished fifth. She should have won. She would have won if she wouldn't have tripped, but she finished fifth. But she finished nevertheless. Even probably more emotional was the 400-meter semifinal, in which a British runner, Derek Redmond, tore his hamstring. And he was determined to finish, and he kept on dragging himself, and it was agonizing to watch him. Finally, his dad came down from the stands, and Derek put his hands over his shoulder, and they crossed the finish line together. Of course, everyone was applauding as they did that, because they saw someone who didn't give up, who refused to quit, even when it was clear he wasn't going to win the race. I'm sure he could have had someone cart him off, but he kept on pushing. He kept on going, even though I'm sure he wanted to quit. I love to hear stories about that. People who refused to quit, people who kept on going even when things were hard, when things were difficult. There isn't a lot of inspiration that comes from people who quit, is there? If you remember the story of the man who came to Jesus and said, "Hey, and he said, I'll follow you wherever I go." And Jesus responds to him and says, just before you make that kind of commitment, remember that the foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the Son of Man doesn't have anywhere to even lay his head. What he was saying was, if you're going to follow me, if we are truly, and this applies to us today, if we're really going to follow Jesus, there's going to be times where it's hard. There's going to be times where, I think he was saying that you don't know where you're going to sleep at night, and maybe you don't know where your food's coming from. I don't think many of us have struggled about wondering where our next meal's coming from, but I think he was saying that things are going to be difficult. If we're following Jesus, it's not always going to be easy, and he was encouraging him, consider that cost. Before you put your hand to the plow and you start going, think about that. Think about how difficult that's going to be, and make sure you're committed. Because it's really discouraging, isn't it, to see someone turn to the Lord and figure out it's hard and it's not easy, and then they quit. It can be the subject of ridicule and discouragement to others. That's the reason why our text this morning is so important. I'd like to turn to Hebrews chapter 12. We're going to specifically look at the first 3 verses in Hebrews. And it's where Paul likens the Christian life to a marathon. Hebrews 12, verse 1 through 3 says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted." You know, this passage, like I mentioned, Paul isn't saying that the Christian life is a sprint. It's not something where speed is important and you just need to go as fast as you can to get to the finish line. But it's a marathon. Endurance is the critical factor, being able to not grow weary, not lose heart, but to keep on going. Paul later talks about, in Timothy, 2 Timothy 4, verse 7 through 8, he talks about the race he's been running. He talks about his life and where he thinks he's at. And 2 Timothy 4, verse 7 through 8, he says, "I've fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. Henceforth, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing." Finishing the race is so important. Starting the race is not good enough. We have to finish, and we want to finish strong. And I think Hebrews, as we go back to Hebrews 12, 1 through 3, gives us 3 pieces of advice to help us to not only endure the race, but also to finish strong. The first one is to be inspired by those who have gone before. If you look at the first part of verse 1 there, it talks about the great cloud of witnesses that's gone on before us. If you look at in the ESV, it says, it begins with the word therefore. So it's connecting it back to chapter 11, which is the chapter of faith, where all these heroes of faith have, and it talks about their lives and how faithful they've been. I'll just pick out a few of those. In verse 7, he mentions Noah. Hebrews 11, verse 7 says, "By faith Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of righteousness that comes by faith." You know, if you think about Noah, you ever think about how much patience Noah had to have? You know, he built this ark, and it took him about 100 years to build that ark. And I'm not sure actually I'm positive Noah wasn't a skilled shipbuilder before he started, because there really wasn't any water. I'm assuming he had some building skills he had some kind of skills, or at least he could tap into some people who had that. But he builds this thing for 100 years. And he tries to warn the people, like, hey, it's going to be a flood. You need to get ready. You need to change your ways. And no one listens to him. But for 100 years, he keeps on building, and he keeps on warning people that this is going to happen. You know, when I think of myself, patience isn't like one of the things I would consider as one of my strengths. It's not. It's not uncommon for me to start asking questions about why something's taking so long when I think it's been long enough. But I wonder what Noah would think about that. You know, if you think about it through the eyes of Noah, a man who built an ark in 100 years and preached for 100 years, and I'm impatient because it's taking a week, it's taking a month, maybe it's taking a year to get something accomplished. I think Noah is a tremendous testimony and an example for us to look at. If we go on to verse 8, it talks about Abraham. It says, "By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going." You know, Abraham is called from where he was, from his family, to go to a place where God would lead him. It wasn't like Abraham was told, hey, you're going to go to this spot. It's going to take you about 10 days to get there, sell some of your stuff, get ready to move. You'll be fine. But he didn't know where he was going. But by faith, he left, and God led him. When he was old, he was told his wife Sarah was going to have a son. And of course, you guys, all of you know the stories. Some other things happened there, but it did happen, and he believed God that it would. So after he had this son, and he's promised that his descendants are going to be like the sand, and he just has one son, and God says, hey, take that son and offer him up to me as a sacrifice. But Abraham was faithful, and he went and he did it. He followed through. He didn't. He stopped when God provided a ram in the thicket. He passed every test because he was faithful. Was he perfect? No, he wasn't. We know his story. We know there's times he made mistakes, but he always came back to follow God faithfully. Another tremendous example. He was obedient when it didn't make sense. He followed God. Again, made some mistakes, tried his own ways, but ultimately he obeyed God. If we go on to verse 22, it's the story of Joseph, and Leon touched on that a little bit this morning, but it's he's sold into slavery by his brothers, and ends up at Potiphar's house, and I can easily see that you could get pretty down and pretty depressed about where life has taken you and how unjust it is, and you had this family, and you guys seem to have everything you needed, and now you're a servant in this weird country, and be pretty easy to just go into a funk and just do the bare minimum. But he didn't do that, obviously, because all of a sudden he's taking care of Potiphar's whole house, and he's put in charge of everything, and remains faithful to God. Because of his faithfulness to God, Potiphar's wife accuses him of sinning with her, something he didn't do, and so he gets thrown into prison. Again, a great opportunity for Joseph to just go into the tank and just start thinking about how unfair life is and how hard life is, and I think what's interesting is what I see in the life of Joseph is that as he goes through difficult times, it's typically just preparing him for the next thing. And I think Leon might have mentioned that this morning as well. You know, he was, and I've seen that in my own life too, as we go through difficult times and challenging life times, if I can respond to those appropriately and learn what I believe God is trying to teach me, generally it prepares me for the next thing that God has for me, for the next challenge or whatever it is that God puts in our way, that he has for us. Because remember, all of us have a purpose here. God has a purpose for each one of us. There's a reason that all of us are here, and God has something that he wants to accomplish in our lives. So now Joseph is in prison. Again, he's faithful. All of a sudden, he's kind of in charge of all the prisoners, and he interprets a dream for the cupbearer and the baker. And it's really interesting if you read that account. It specifically says that I think it was the cupbearer that wasn't killed. How he forgot. It specifically says that he forgot Joseph, and I don't know what the conversation was between the two, but it's interesting that he forgot about him. So Joseph is still in prison. He's still just doing whatever he had to do to keep that prison running. Nothing glorious, nothing fancy about that, but he's being faithful where God has called him. Then all of a sudden Pharaoh has a dream, and they need someone to interpret this dream, and Joseph comes and interprets the dream for him, and suddenly everything changes. He's gone from someone who's in a really low position and who doesn't really have a lot of good things going for him in life. All of a sudden he has power, he has money, he has control of the money, the grain, food, and the people. And what I think is really interesting about the story of Joseph is in that he is still faithful to God. I think we'd all recognize that there are dangers in both positions, right? When you don't have anything, when times are really hard, it can cause us to forget about God or to turn our back on him. And then when things are really good, when things are just really going our way and we don't have anything to worry about, we can also forget about God and just think it's somehow we're going to do all this stuff by ourselves. But Joseph proved himself faithful in both situations. You know, the list goes on. If you read through that chapter, talks about Moses and Samson and Samuel and David and more. There's a great cloud of witnesses. I think what I found is that when I'm in a particularly difficult situation and when I have a pity party for myself and wonder how I'm ever going to get through this, it's been helpful for me to reflect on the fact that I'm not the only person that's faced difficult times. I'm not the only person that has faced probably some of the exact same things. We talked about examples from the Bible. There's other examples, both Old Testament and New Testament. There's early church history. There's Anabaptist history of people who faced things that are much more difficult than anything we face today. And they're faithful. They're people we can look to. So I think if we can be inspired by those who have gone before us and we can draw examples from them, we can draw inspiration from them, and just recognizing that, eventually this too shall pass. The second one is be prepared for the struggles that will come. The second piece of advice in that chapter, I think it's in verse 1, he says, "Let us also lay aside every weight and the sin which clings to us so easily." He's saying we need to get rid of the sin that clings to us so easily.